Good morning, everyone, and good morning to my guest, Katharine. Help me with your last name. Is it Birbalsingh?
Birbalsingh.
Birbalsingh. Okay. Well, good morning to you, and thank you for joining us today. For my listeners and viewers watching, Katharine is an award-winning educator as well as the founder and headmistress of the Michaela Community School in Wembley Park, London, also known as Miss Snuffy, Miss_Snuffy on Twitter, and widely known for a very specific approach to education that some love and some hate.
I should just explain the Miss Snuffy thing, actually, because your American audience will know Sesame Street, I suspect.
Obviously.
When I started blogging, this is in 2004 or 5, I called myself Miss Snuffleupagus because of the, how Big Bird, and some Mrs. Snuffleupagus was never really there, and the whole elephant in the room idea. That's why I called myself Miss Snuffleupagus, and then over time it became Miss Snuffy on this blog of mine, and I kept Miss Snuffy for Twitter purposes. But the idea on the blog was that I was talking about all these things that one is never allowed to talk about in education.
Well, and I think it's important for people to know that you were an educator at the time, and you were writing anonymously about your experience as an educator, because you wanted to tell the truth, because you were seeing things that you wanted to tell the truth about. And truth is not something everybody always wants to tell when it's political or when it's, hard to navigate. You might be called names for telling the truth, but I want to just start at the beginning. For me, your approach is seen as being no excuses, no nonsense, strict and disciplined. All of those words that we could use to mean that this isn't the laissez-faire education where anything goes in your schools and in your classrooms. Do you think that that's the fairest characterization, or is that how you would start to explain your approach fairly?
Well, partly. I mean, there's lots of things I think that distinguish us, but that's one thing. Yeah, we are all about holding all children to the same standards. I don't think you're doing children any favors when you say, oh, well, it's harder for you because you come from a poor background, or you're Black, or you're a boy, or your father left, or whatever whatever the issue is. Mm-hmm. If you look at that child and you say, oh, well, because of that, I shouldn't expect the same of you as I would of, some rich white kid who, whose parents are happy together, and he has, the Brady Bunch family, or, like, I say Brady Bunch, they family, were they? Because they come together. But if you do that, then the fact is he'll never reach high standards. He just won't. So that's in terms of behavior. But then I'd say the same thing goes for homework. The thing you think to yourself, oh, but he doesn't have a room to do his homework in, or there's 3 or 4 of the children in the house, and so it's hard for him to concentrate. Well, okay, if you expect less of him, life isn't going to expect less of him, and he's going to come up for some hard knocks later on in life. So I'd say that kind of no excuses philosophy isn't just about behavior. It's about absolutely everything. But that's just one thing that makes us who we are. We are lots of things. That's one of them.
Yeah, I was looking through a lot of previous things written about you, and just in looking into it a little bit, doing a little bit of study, I was trying to figure out which was more important, the discipline in the school culture, or the focus on knowledge, the focus on building upon knowledge given to kids. And I did a thought exercise last night in thinking about it. Was if you got rid of one, which one would do the most damage of getting rid of? If you had to just focus on either the knowledge or the discipline across all schools, which one would be the most helpful, and which one would be the most destructive to get rid of?
Yeah, I actually think the behavior is the most important thing. I don't think you can do anything. Behavior is first, always. Just however you're going to teach, progressively or traditionally, or it doesn't matter. Yes, I think it's better to teach traditionally, but if you don't have good behavior, then nothing else is going to follow, because the kids aren't going to work. The kids aren't going to, they're not going to be able to hear the teacher. When I think about my career, the times that I would, I would be in lessons where, some of the children would be sitting there looking at the teacher. I remember in some of my own classes at the beginning, how they'd be looking at me and hoping that somebody could take control of the class. And somebody has got It's just that it's some of the kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the adults in the room, and that they're desperate for the adult in the room to have control because they just want to learn something and they can't hear anything. And frankly, if you have the behavior, if the teacher then teaches progressively, they're not going to learn as much as they would do if they were taught traditionally, but they'd learn something, you know? So I think behavior is the most important thing. Having said that, if you really want to, teach children well, I think you need to teach them in a traditional fashion. So you said knowledge. Knowledge needs to be central, but it also needs to be taught explicitly. Essentially, I'd say our school is about being the best kind of school that there is. And so every detail we look at, we try and make it we try and make it so that it works well. And if it doesn't work, we change it. There are things that we've tried that haven't worked, and so we don't do it. But the big things are knowledge and teaching it explicitly and being a traditional teacher. It's the behavior and having high expectations for all the children. I'd say another thing that we actively teach them gratitude. Our values are relatively traditional. So we believe that if you're grateful, you're a happier person. We want the children to be happy. We want them to be able to understand a sense of duty towards their classmates and towards their communities. We want them. Am I still there, or have I? Yeah, there I am. We want them to have an understanding of personal responsibility, and in valuing other people. So it really is about the whole child. We're not just about the academic results and teaching them knowledge. I mean, not at all. In fact, I'd say one of the biggest things that makes us different is the feel of the place, how resilient our how determined and ambitious and how much of a team we feel when we're working together, not just the teachers, but the kids as well. So it's hard. It's always hard to explain when I'm talking like this to somebody because I say it all and everybody says, well, I don't think it all sounds very nice. But you really do just have to come and see it.
Yeah. And, I think one of the reasons why, people might say, well, it sounds nice is because they don't understand the mechanics of running a school involves a lot of missing, like you can't translate it all in a few minutes in a soundbite. If you were asked what are the mechanics of how your school runs? I mean, when you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, you want to set culture. So before the kids even arrive, when you set up a school, how do you make sure that your staff is all on board with the same coherent educational philosophy? That's something like a lot of principals in America, I think, would not have a good start on. So when you founded your school, how did you approach that part first?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I've never really understood in America is, you have this kind of, you're either in administration or you're in teaching. And the idea is that the principal is an administrator. That concept doesn't exist in England. We are all teachers. And I say that. It's true that I don't teach, but there are many heads who do teach. So many principals who do teach. And I don't. But that's just a choice because I feel that there's so much to do in my role as principal that if I want to, I can get people to teach for me, but there's many things that I do as principal that I can't get other people to do for me. So that's why I make that choice. But lots of principals teach, and the deputies, so the vice principals, they definitely always teach. In many schools, they would be teaching half timetable easily. And then you might have assistant heads, we call underneath that. And the way it works in England is that you work your way up sort of. So you might become a head of department to middle management or a head of year. And then you move up eventually into senior management. And then you would eventually become a head if that's what you wanted to do. And so I do wonder. I've always questioned the kind of structure in America, this idea of these two halves, and that you're either a teacher or you're an administrator. And just the word administrator seems really odd. Yeah. I'm not an administrator. I mean, it's just absurd. Yeah. I run a school. I mean, I'm nothing against administrators. That's great, but it's a very different job to what I do. In fact, I would make a really bad administrator. I mean, I'm terrible. I nearly didn't get on to talk to you today because I'm so bad with the computer. I would be a very bad administrator. So I think it's important what you call different roles. I think it's a bad idea from the American point of view to say that because it underplays the the role of the principal in setting culture, like you just said, in setting a vision, in having people follow you, in developing consistency across the school. So I see it as my role as principal to ensure that my teachers can teach. And if they're unable to teach in the school, that's my fault. I think far too often in teaching, we just look at the teacher, say, oh, he's a rubbish teacher, so that's why. And sometimes there's some truth in that. I'm not, sometimes the teacher isn't pulling their weight and isn't doing what's necessary. But it can also be because the people who are leading the school, in my position, are not doing their part in making sure that there are consistent systems happening throughout the school. And I find that there are too many leaders that make excuses and say, oh, it's the teachers. The teachers aren't turning up to their classrooms. So for instance, one way of getting great behavior in your school is to make sure that all of your teachers are at the start of every lesson at the door, greeting the children as they come in. And as the children come in, they might say little things. Oh, expecting great things from you today. Oh, really great lesson, last lesson. Okay, remember last lesson wasn't so great, but today I want to see better things, that sort of thing. And they're coming in and you're saying hello. And then when they leave, the children should all be dismissed in a similar kind of fashion. And you're saying goodbye to them. Now, how do you get that happening? Well, that is the role of the leaders in the school to make that happen. And so if you're trying to change something in your school and make that happen, the leaders need to go out and say, right, everybody, this is what we're doing next Monday. We're all going to get out there and we're going to be at our classroom doors and we're all going to be checking on you. And these are the people that are going to be checking. And this is how we're going to be checking. And this is how we're holding you to account. And this is what we need from you. And we're all part of a team and we need you to do this so that we can see a real change. And they need to inspire the teachers to believe that this change is going to make their lives better and the children's lives better. Now, the word administrator suggests that you're in a room, pushing some pens around and doing some paperwork, which is bad. As a leader, you need to be talking to your people all of the time. You need to be, so for instance, I have briefing with all of the staff on a Monday morning for 20 minutes together. And then on a Tuesday after school for an hour and a half, we meet every single week. Or an hour and 15, I should say. And we meet and we talk about the ethos of the school and the culture of the school. And if there are things that are going slightly off course, I'm saying, look, everybody, I think this is a bit of an issue. This is what we need to change. And the whole of the senior team is very, very tight. The senior team and I meet every single morning. We meet at 7 a.m. every morning. To discuss what happened yesterday and so that we can move on it instantly the following day. And then we will then meet with the whole staff and tell them the things that we're finding. Oh, we're finding things aren't doing so well outside at the moment. Children are getting a bit rowdy. Let's make sure that we're all on it when it comes to the basketball courts or when it comes to the ping pong or whatever it is. That might be one example.
And just to clarify, this is every day that you do this?
Every day. We meet at 7 a.m. every single day.
Wow. Whole staff meeting every morning. That's a lot.
My senior team.
Okay. So your senior team. Okay, gotcha.
We meet every day at 7 a.m. With the staff, we meet once a week after school on a Tuesday for an hour and 15 minutes and on a Monday morning briefly for briefing. So that's Monday morning. Everybody's come back from the weekend. That's essentially about notices. I stand up in front of everybody and I say, right, everybody, remember, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. A couple of other people will speak, and then everybody goes. Then on Tuesday, after school, we all meet, and that's where we'll talk more about ethos and what our expectations are of the children and what we're trying to achieve as a school. But the daily thing happens with the senior team. So it means that we're on top of everything. It's not the case. So what we wouldn't do at school, which I all my life I've seen, is do kind of presentations. Sometimes at senior team meetings in other schools, people bring a little PowerPoint and they present and that's done. Everybody sits there and listens. Oh, yeah. That's not what we do.
That's good because PowerPoint is evil. I want to keep reminding people PowerPoint was literally invented by Beelzebub, but keep going.
Yeah, we don't do anything. I don't do anything without a purpose. So if anything, I think if we're wasting time, I say cut that, For instance, with COVID and this whole situation at the moment, so we've now been on lockdown. I don't know, I kind of lost track of time, but we've had, these are the 2 weeks of Easter holiday that we're in right now. And 2 weeks before that, we've been sent home. So it's really been 4 weeks that we have not been in school. And in that first week when we were off, we did a staff meeting on Zoom on Tuesday after school, just like we would normally do it, right? And we did this staff meeting. But normally in our staff meetings, everybody's talking. You know, people are putting their hands up and asking questions, saying things, disagreeing, whatever, and we're having a big conversation. And there's about, I don't know, 70 odd staff that are in the room at the time, you know, when we did the staff meeting. So we have 70 odd people online on Zoom. I can't even see everybody on my screen because I'm having to flip between the different screens just in order to even be able to see everybody. We had to have all their microphones on mute because otherwise it would have been too noisy. We wouldn't have been able to do the meeting. So I'm then talking, and I'm aware that nobody can interrupt me, and we can't have a conversation. It was awful.
It's
and so
much harder.
It was awful.
Yeah.
I mean, not with that many people. So I've done other Zoom meetings, obviously, with the heads of department or with the heads of year or with my senior team. But with that many people, it was ridiculous. And I thought, you know what? This is actually a waste of time. So we haven't had a whole staff meeting. Now, we haven't done the weekly thing. We're going to have one next week. The reason why we're doing it next week is because we want to make everybody really clear. We're moving to Google Classroom now in terms of what we're doing. So we want to make sure they're clear on how to do that. But the normal ethos, consistency conversations that we have on a Tuesday after school just aren't happening at the moment. And that's because I've decided this is actually a waste of time. And that is how I run everything. If I think something's a waste of time, I cut. And so that's what I've done there. When we get back, obviously, we'll pick that up again.
When you know, I just want to say, I think like when I speak to what I consider to be the most successful school leaders here in the United States, who run schools that work with lots of kids that are disadvantaged in one way or another, or marginalized in one way or another, the way that they use time and staff and their resources is their superpower. The way that they use time and staff and discipline and how much time they waste, which you're hitting on right now, I think is an obsession of all of them. Like get rid of all the wasted time. But if we move away from your staff as like how you handle staff and how you handle structure, and let's move to the student, right? There are so many preconceptions about students that fall behind. And when it comes to the expectations part, there will be people that will tell you very directly, the research tells you that the correlation between poverty and low performance is unbreakable by anything you do within the school, that the majority of the magic happens outside of the school in terms of changing those things. So basically, we should just make sure that kids feel, you know, warm and fuzzy and happy and give them hugs at school and try and change societal factors. What would be your response to the idea that the correlation between poverty and low performance in schools is unbreakable by anything you do in the school?
Well, I mean, that's just weird. I mean, why do that? Why is it an either or? I mean, obviously things change in their lives outside. I only wish their fathers were around. I only wish that, you know, I don't know, their mothers weren't drinking. I only wish that there's a million things I would wish for, you know, and I do. I wish it all the time. Every time I see a video on Twitter of some parents being wonderful with their children, I always think, if only all my kids at school could have this, you know. Of course I wish it, but I have to deal with reality. I mean, the fact is they don't have the families that I wish they could have. They don't have the support. And you know, the big thing is the support at home that I don't think that they've got. We have very disadvantaged children. So we're in the inner city in London. I mean, give your waiting for our boys coming out. Last year at the end of his exams, one of our boys came out and was stabbed twice with a compass. You know, there was a boy down the road from one of the schools who was murdered by one of the South London gangs who came up and killed him because he put a video up on YouTube insulting them. So like this, you know, we are very much in the inner city. You know, you don't really get tougher. I mean, we've got very, like other schools do, like ours, but I'm just giving you context. And of course, as many schools, I mean, there are many schools in America that make a huge difference to these children's lives, in particular because they don't have the structure in their communities or perhaps in their families that would allow them normally to succeed. And so they look to their school for some order and for some structure pressure, sometimes even just for love, somebody who believes in them, somebody who can teach them and hold them to high standards. What I always say is that children push, we push back. It's just that is the of an adult. All children, from the moment they are born, when the baby is born, he cries. Why does he cry? Because he wants his mother. And then he cries again and thinks, oh, this is pretty good. Actually, every time I cry,
something that good happens. Yeah.
I get some milk, I get warm, it's lovely. So it keeps on crying. Now, that's what they do. This is what children do. Now, it's not because they're evil. It's because they're children and they want to get what they want, you know? And the fact is, children go to school to learn. That is why they go to school. But their nature comes out, which is to push back against that learning because they're naughty. You know, they're not horrible. They're kids. They're cute and they're naughty. So when they're naughty, it's for us, it's our duty and our responsibility to say, no, I'm the one who's in charge and I'm not going to let you do that. And once we take that naughtiness off the plate, the child is free to be able to put it up in lessons and not feel like he's going to be judged by his peers or laughed at. He doesn't have to play up to the big man who's the guy in charge, who's going to get the girls as opposed to learning about Shakespeare. You know, like these kids are under so much pressure to behave in a certain fashion, to look cool, that we have to take that pressure away from them. That's our role. And we need to see it as our role, as opposed to indulging it in ourselves. So
and you know, in a lot of cases, the thing that I've heard you talk about is the hidden kids, the silent ones who really do want you to take control because they're sick of things being out of control all around them. And you know, when the kids just feel like it's a free for all, and the toughest, biggest kid in the classroom is the one who runs everything. Now you have many other kids who don't feel safe, even at school. They want to see you in charge. We have a couple of people who are asking tactical questions here. Gail Morrison says, how do you ensure the highest quality curriculum? The content students get is factually accurate, free of errors, and articulates across grades.
Yeah, you know, that is hard. It is hard. And, you know, we started brand new. So we just had year 7, which is the same as your grade 7. And then we've built up. So we've been able to build certain resources. We've been able to use our time. That's another big thing that I do. Like you were saying about the principals are successful. They always think about not wasting time. So we're always thinking about how we can reuse stuff. And if we're creating a resource, we don't have one teacher create a resource who then just uses it for his class. The teacher, anytime a resource is created, it's created for all of us, and we use it across that department and across years. So that eventually you have a bank of resources that you can then use. And the thing about doing that is that you can then concentrate on looking at the details and having other teachers go through, you know, so teacher Mike does a resource and then James can look at that resource to see, oh, you know, is everything right here and so on. And so they're working as a team creating resources. So that's one. It's also being clear about the sort of thing that you want them to know. And I think that, you know, when you say about us being about knowledge, I haven't spoken about that yet, really, which is to say that we believe very much in a traditional form of knowledge, that we think that they to be taught dead white men, for instance. That's something that people think, oh my goodness.
And you know, this is where you get in real trouble. I just want to say this is this is where the real trouble breaks out. So tell me more about this, because when I hear about knowledge and we need to teach kids knowledge, my first question always is, that sounds canonical. And it seems to me like it all determines who decides what the canon is, right? And you know, these things aren't free of subjective. There's a large world fund of information. If we were to look at all of human history and all of human knowledge, there's a large world fund of it, and everybody is going to choose their canon. How do you determine that?
Well, you say that.
Yeah.
What I would say is a nice rule of thumb is to just think about, say, the New York Times, and think about the references that are in the New York Times, and think, well, what would be the kind of knowledge that people would just assume? So the reason why Shakespeare, for instance, might be mentioned is you think, well, you know, Shakespeare's phrases are in everything that we you know, all the time we use them, we don't even realize. Everybody knows of Shakespeare. He'll be referred to regularly. So that's something that we want the kids to know. we want them to know, I don't know, the capital cities of various countries, perhaps not all countries, but certainly the big countries, the European countries, for instance, North American, you might not, the Pacific, various islands out in the Pacific, you might not care so much about. And so you think, well, why is that? Because, of course, if you were growing up on an island on Vanuatu in the Pacific, then actually all of that geography becomes a lot more important. It depends on where you are situated. So if you were teaching history in America, you would obviously concentrate on American history. We should be concentrating on British history. And the reason for that is because of who we are, and because our newspapers will refer to things that are more British than the American newspapers would. So I think you need to look at where you are and then make those decisions. Now, obviously, even within that, there will be discussion about, well, what should we include and what should we not include? And I'm not particularly wedded to say you can't have this or you must have that. I think, for instance, it would be a bit weird if we spent any time at all, frankly, teaching Chinese history.
Really?
I mean, to teach Chinese history. If you're a Chinese boy growing up in China, it would be bizarre if you didn't learn it. It would also be bizarre if you didn't learn Chinese. We teach English and we teach Shakespeare and we teach British history. And I think that's right. And in America, I mean, to be honest, I think you guys probably do a lot more. Britain tends to have quite a... Well, I mean, America does too. I was about to say that they're really quite ashamed of their past, and so is America. But there is more of a sense of, you would obviously learn about Lincoln and Jefferson and so on. I mean, it would be weird if you didn't. I have to say, in Britain, I don't see the same dedication to one's country as you see in America, and I think it's good. You guys have got that. We don't have it so much here now. And I understand the need for wanting to diversify in terms of what you might want to teach, because once upon a time, things were not as free as they are now. And, you wouldn't ever see a Black author being taught, or you wouldn't ever see history was whitewashed. And that was all wrong. We've had to move away from that. And that's absolutely right that we've done that. So I think that was right. However, you don't then want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and not know who Charles Dickens is, for instance, because he was an important writer in Britain. And it's important that the children know who he was and what he wrote. If you don't know about Scrooge, if you don't know who Bob Cratchit was, then you're going to find life more difficult. You will. If you don't know these things.
And it really, I'm with you on the fact that we need to be teaching knowledge. I believe in all knowledge, like a world fund of knowledge. Like, if you were to know everything, if you had a God view of the world or whatnot, you would just be better able to understand almost any situation that you're in. And if you had a very limited world knowledge, like a very limited to just your neighborhood or just your city or just your county or just your state or just your country, like I think actually, you said something that pushed me a different direction, which is I actually think American kids need to know British history, not just American history. And I think vice versa, because they're related in some ways that are important. But I think they need to know about Egypt too. You can't have, and Greece and Rome and,
The point is that you have to make choices, because you can't teach them 24 hours a day. I mean, you got to make choices. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying don't ever learn Chinese history in your life. Clearly, if you want to learn Chinese history, that's great. Yeah. But I wouldn't want to take up curriculum time at Michaela teaching Chinese history and then not teaching them British history as a result, because choices do have to be made. And obviously, within that school, people need to have a conversation and come to an agreement about what that might be. The guiding principles on that, I would say, are where you are, in terms of your country, and to also have a sense of the culture. So when I say look to certain newspapers and say, well, what do we imagine? If you were sitting in a dinner party and people were having conversations, what's the kind of stuff that we would expect people to be able to know? Because what I'm always imagining, that one kid becomes a doctor, one becomes a lawyer, one becomes a banker, one becomes a PR guy and a marketing guy and whatever, and they're out with their clients and they're talking to them and they're having dinner. I don't want them to be in a position where they're really embarrassed and they think, I can't have this conversation because actually I don't know anything that these people are talking about that particular thing. Chances of them sitting down at that dinner table in Manhattan and talking about the details of Chinese history in the 18th century, I think are pretty unlikely. But they might, for instance, mention Lincoln or Jefferson. And if my kid is sitting there thinking, who's Lincoln? And the thing is, people might say, well, that's ridiculous. How would he not know who Lincoln is? I mean, people need to recognize just how poor the knowledge is for kids from the inner city. I mean, for my whole life here, I remember once that I had my class of kids, they were leaving, so we have GCSEs here at age 16. So these kids are leaving in a couple of weeks' time. And I, in passing, mentioned the Holocaust. And one of the kids said, Holocaust? What's that?
Wow.
And a couple of other kids said, what do you mean? What do you mean? Holocaust is? He didn't know what the Holocaust was. And I went marching over to my principal and I said, this is outrageous. I said, we have a child who's leaving school and doesn't know what the Holocaust is. And his response was, well, he's in the bottom set. Come on. And I thought,
and we have in the United States, we have a running gag on late night TV where they go out into the public and they put a microphone in front of people and they ask them very basic questions to see what they know. And what they find over and over again is that people don't know who's on the Supreme Court. Sometimes they don't know who the vice president of the United States is, right? They definitely don't know who their governor is in some cases, right? Which to me seems astounding that you would go 12 years, sometimes 16 years, but you would go through many years of an educational process and come out the other end not knowing who is on your Supreme Court in your country, not in the past, but today, like wouldn't know that. But I'm still having a reaction, if I'm being honest, Katharine. I'm still having a reaction, culturally speaking, in that the United States is a pluralistic society. Here's my problem. We are many different people in the United States. We're not all of one full background. We're of a common nationality, but we're not of a common kind of cultural religious background. We don't have a national religion. We don't have a national race or culture. We're very much diverse, right? So many people, our Chinese Americans are teaching, on Saturdays something else to their kids. So are our Jewish Americans, and we have, all that stuff going on. So the idea that information has to be culturally relevant to the child, right, in some way, shape, or form, works with this dead white guy canon. Works if you're a young white kid, for instance. But I think a lot of people would say, they'd push back on you and say, like, you have to build and scaffold on what kids already know and experience. So if you're going to start with that, you're going to basically need to start with where they are culturally. A Black American child is going to need you to build upon what they know already to get to Shakespeare, maybe. I don't know this to be true. I'm just saying I know for sure people would push back on you to say that.
Oh, I know they do, but I think they're wrong. I mean, the fact is that we've got Black kids, we've got white kids. The white kids don't understand Shakespeare better than the Black kids. Your skin color doesn't prevent you from being able to understand Shakespeare. They're all kids. We're all human beings. And so we're all able to learn about Shakespeare. Now, the question is whether or not we want them all to learn about Shakespeare, not whether or not they're able, because nobody's going to tell me that a Black child isn't able to read Charles Dickens just as well as a white kid. Of course he is. He's just as bright. He's just as able. I mean, just because he's Black doesn't make him incapable of reading Charles Dickens. Just like the white kid isn't incapable of reading James Baldwin. And when it comes to American culture and history and so on, there very much is. I mean, I would imagine that James Baldwin, for instance, ought to be part of your curriculum. I mean, so because there's a different history there. But anyway, I mean, the point is, people need to decide in their own schools what they want from that curriculum. But those kids, whatever color they are able to access the same curriculum simply because they're all children. They aren't Black first. They're children first. They're human beings first. Now, it's interesting what you said about being Chinese or, the Jewish Americans, and they do their own thing on Saturdays. And I'm all for that, various different groups. If they want to have a Saturday group and learn Greek on Saturday because the Greek community is doing that, or the Chinese community is learning history of China, or, that's fine. Why not? But when it comes to the state and what the state is providing in terms of education, I think it's really important that we provide something that is accessible to all children, precisely because we live in a multicultural community. And it ought to be the things that everyone is going to need to be able to have a culturally rich life. And what is culturally rich is determined not by what your skin color is, but by what your culture in your society is. Those kids are going to grow up when they become, you know, a marketing exec. They're not only, a black kid is growing up, he becomes a marketing exec. He's not only going to have meetings with black people. In fact, he's very likely to be having meetings with kids perhaps who went to some private school and who know all this stuff inside out. And if he's unable to keep up in conversation because his teachers thought, oh no, but you're black, so you can't really access Shakespeare, then he's at a disadvantage. And I think that it's wrong for the state to let him down, because that's literally the state and his teachers judging him on the color of his skin and saying, no, dear boy, you can't do it because you're black. The white boy can access Shakespeare because somehow magically his white skin means that he can understand Shakespeare, whereas your black skin means that you can't understand Shakespeare. I don't believe that's the case. I think anybody can. I think Shakespeare is universal. He talks about jealousy and
okay, wait a second. Let me ask you a question. Is it bad that I think that the movies are always better than the book when it comes to Shakespeare? Is it bad that I'd rather see the movie?
I mean,
you know,
is that it's hard to access.
It really is hard to access. Yeah, I don't care who you are. Yeah.
And I think all children, like, I mean, it's not because you're black that you can't, that you think.
It's not melanin that stops me from liking Shakespeare.
No.
Oh, okay. I'm glad we cleared that up, you know.
Everybody thinks that about Shakespeare. And those kids who at school, for whatever reason, really get into Shakespeare, then they get into it and they run with it, and they prefer the plays to the films. You prefer the films. I mean, like, who cares? You decided to go. What school does is that it gives you the opportunity to see a bit of history, a bit of geography, a bit of science, a bit of English, and all of this. And you might then take a particular interest in some of those subjects, and you go on to university eventually, and you study them further on. Sometimes it's the case that some children think, well, actually, this academic stuff isn't for me, and they decide to go a different route. That's fine. But my role as a secondary school educator is to give them the basics. I want them to be able to leave school knowing how to read, how to write, how to be numerical. You know, they in this country, 20% of children are leaving school functionally illiterate and functionally enumerate. So that means they go into a shop and they can't count their change. That's 1 out of every 5 kids not being able to count his change. Like, that's bad. You know, we spend over 90 billion pounds a year on our education system. So there's something wrong. Now, I have to say, over the last 10 years, I think things have massively improved. I think a lot of schools are moving more towards making knowledge central. And when I say knowledge central, because it's not just about the dead white men. And I think the dead white men, in a way, is a bit of a red herring, because actually in so many ways, I just wish that schools would teach them something. And when I say teach them something, because then it makes it sound, what do you mean, Catherine? Are they not teaching them anything? And in some cases, I actually think that is true. They're not really managing to teach them anything. They're trying to teach them something. But because, 1, the behavior is really bad, and 2, the poor teacher has been taught to teach in a progressive fashion. So rather than standing at the front of the classroom and leading the learning and being the adult in the room who's the authority and who is able to get those kids, inspire them, and keep them with her, and let's go, everybody. I always say the teacher's driving the bus, you know, and the teacher drives the bus and the children are on the bus with her. And, you know, every now and again, little Johnny, he looks out the window, little Johnny starts niggling little David, and the teacher says, no, come on, get back on the bus, get back on the bus. So anytime they're jumping off the bus, the teacher's keeping them on the bus, but she's the one driving it, and she knows where the destination is. In the last 30, 40 years in education, both in America and here, that idea has gone by the wayside. And in fact, now what happens is the children's desks are in groups, and they are looking at each other, and they are leading their own learning. And the teacher is often called a facilitator of learning instead of a teacher. And they move amongst the desks, keeping children on task instead of driving that bus and being in charge. And that lack of authority, we've lost that authority in the teacher. And I think that the children who suffer the most in that situation are those who are the disadvantaged, because You see, if you're facilitating learning and if the children are leading their own learning and you go home to your home with lots of books and the parents talking around the dinner table about the politics of the day, about who was appointed to the Supreme Court and so on, and they all hear this, the kids hear this all the time. When they go to school, they've been given the knowledge which allows them to lead their own learning. Now, even those kids, I think, would be better off if the teacher were leading the learning, but they can kind of get away with it. The kids who can't get away with it are the ones who, when they go home, the parents themselves don't know who's on the Supreme Court. The parents don't know who.
You know, and I think there's a reality, though, in this. The reality that I've seen in visiting a lot of schools. I'm just thinking of a school in Nashville, Tennessee, not long ago that I saw that looked exactly like what you just described in terms of every teacher in the building was turned on every second. There was no wasted time. The kids they knew the prompts, yes. And that kept them on task. And it was obvious. It was masterful. Right. It also looked like a lot of work. It also looked like something like I've been in other schools where it looked like it would just be easier to not be the teacher that has to keep prompting, correcting, keeping people on. So how long does a teacher last? What's the shelf life of a teacher who has to teach that exhausting way every day?
Yeah. So this is a good question. So the thing is it's what you said about those principals who are really successful and they think about how they've organized things and they're not wasting time. So I, for instance, don't hire any teaching assistants, and that's very unusual in England. People tend to have a teacher and then a teaching assistant, and especially in a primary school, you'd have both in every classroom. At secondary school, you'd have quite a number of teaching assistants moving around in the different lessons. We don't have any. It saves me a lot of money. I also save a lot of money in various different ways. I mean, and one of the big ways in which I save money, for instance, I'm not constantly having to repair the building because there is no damage to the building. People underestimate, people accuse me. They say, how come you have such strict behavior? That's so mean and horrible. And actually, I think it's very loving and it's a good thing to be strict with behavior. But one of the big advantages is that I save a lot of money, because our building isn't constantly destroyed by the kids breaking it up. And so I save money in all kinds of different ways. And by doing that, I can then employ more staff, which means I can try and reduce the timetables a little bit of my staff so they're not teaching as much. And then that means if they're giving more in the lessons, like you were saying, keeping them on task and so on, they can do because they have more breaks spaced out throughout their week. The other thing is we don't do huge amounts of marking. We do some marking, but we don't mark books. So, and that is because I think it's total waste of time. And I don't do things that are a waste of time. Kids, they look at their, teacher spends ages putting all these marks and correcting this, that, and the other. Children never look at it, and it's just a waste of time. And so I don't have my teachers doing that. We all plan our lessons together, right? Remember I was saying about the resources. So that time isn't being doubled up all the time. In other schools, if each of you are having to plan here, for instance, during COVID is a really good example right now. The lessons that we are pumping out online and the videos that we're making, one person is doing it for the whole of grade 7. One person is doing it for the whole of grade 8 in each subject. I'm not having every teacher do it and every teacher delivering online lessons, because that would be a waste of their time. So while one person is doing the geography lesson and pumping that out, the others are doing some geography resourcing that we know we'll be able to use next year and beyond, So we think very strategically about how we're using people's time, which then frees them up to be able to dedicate their energies into teaching the kinds of lessons that you're saying are tiring. And they are tiring. But you know what's really tiring? Children telling you to F off. Children...
That's true.
Children having no respect. You getting really upset. The emotional feelings. It's exhausting as a teacher. I remember... at a school that I once worked at, I would come, and it was the schools that I've worked at, I mean, they're tough schools. And I would come out of the staff room in the morning, ready, the kids would be arriving. And I remember I would walk out of the staff room, and every morning I'd have to G myself up. And I'd walk out and I'd say, I mean, I can't use this language, but I would say to myself, nobody's going to F with me today. I go out there thinking, nobody's going to F with me today. Right, I'm on it, come at me. I mean, now for me to have to build myself up in that kind of way to make sure they weren't going to get me. We were going to get where we needed to go. I think it wasn't a case of, I dislike these kids. I love these kids, right? But I had to do that to make sure I had them, because otherwise they would feel the weakness, and I couldn't be weak, right? And if you're having to pump yourself up in that kind of way on every minute of the day, that's exhausting. Teachers at Michaela do that. Teachers at Michaela can just be teachers. And
that's because you've put so much time into engineering the school and designing things and having strategy behind how you keep order. Erica Sanzi, who is a fan of yours, we have lots of your fans watching today. Eric Collins has said that your book, The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Teachers, is tops of the charts for him, and something that he highly recommends to everybody. We put the link out for folks. Erica Graham Sanzi, also, who follows you on Twitter and is very, very supportive of your work, asked the question about Black boys. In the United States, there's massive disparities, specifically with Black boys in education, that nobody has really figured out. Do you have any thinking around the particular problem of Black boys that's different than maybe working with other students?
Yeah, I think that, it's complex, isn't it? And I do think that, there is some truth actually in what you said about there's only so much impact that a school can have. We have huge impact on our children, but there is only so much that one can have. And I think one needs to recognize that and not feel too depressed when you haven't completely transformed one child's life. You need to look at it across all of the kids. Now, in terms of Black boys, and I would say, by the way, actually, just in terms of the book, there is Battle Hymn of Tiger Teachers, but I'm literally right now working on our second book, which will come out in June. And I nearly mentioned it earlier when you were talking about culture, because our second book it's called The Power of Culture. And about the whole consistency point and about our values and about bringing everybody together. I think Black boys, if you look at fathers that are missing, that's a very big thing in their lives. If you don't see much of your dad and you're a boy, it's very hard. That's one big thing. I think the music that they listen to and
oh boy, you're gonna start some trouble now. I've brought this up on other podcasts, and keep going. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The music, the culture of victimhood that they are immersed in. If you are constantly told by the people you listen to in terms of music, by the people who are around you in your community, by the media, if everybody's always telling you that you don't have a hope in hell, that your country is against you, that the teachers are against you, the establishment's against you, you're going to give up. You will, because, everybody's against you. So what's the point of trying? The only way a child can succeed in life is by somebody holding out their hand, taking his hand in theirs, and helping them along the way. That's the only way. Children can't do it on their own. And they certainly cannot do it if they're constantly being told by absolutely everybody that the world is against them. And that is what the musicians that they listen to tell them. That is what the media tells them. That is what, everybody. And a lot of these people are well-meaning, actually. A lot of these people think they're doing them some kind of favor. You are not doing them a favor by constantly telling them that the world is against them. The world may very well be against them, right? I'm not saying that it isn't. But you cannot keep talking about it in that way, because if you do, they give up. And then they find an easier route in which boys in particular, and which is one of the reasons why boys are especially affected in this way. It's not just about the missing fathers, because lots of girls will have missing fathers too. And I know they're girls, so maybe it doesn't have the same kind of impact. But women don't have the same... naturally, they don't have the same sense of, I need to go out and prove myself in that kind of way. They're not like that, right? Even me, and I'm quite raw, men are much more, look at me, they're just much more, they have bigger egos, is what I'd say, generally speaking. I'm making very general comments. And I think when a boy is constantly told that he can't make it, he then needs to find some other way of making it. And he can make it by, I don't know, becoming a drug dealer, playing basketball really well, being great on his video games, getting into fights all the time and disrupting the lessons, whatever it is, whatever route he decides to choose. He can become really good at that. And then he's up there going, hey, look at me, I'm the big man here. And what we need to do is make it possible so that that boy can do that in the classroom in a different kind of way. And where that black boy is undermined is when his teachers are thinking, yeah, but he's black, so he can't really access Shakespeare. Oh, but he's black, he can't really do his maths. I mean, and it's not just Shakespeare, they say it about math, you know, they'll say that culturally he can't do math. I mean, it's insane. I mean, I think it's insane, this kind of talk. And so he's not given the tools to be able to look like, to be able to do that about Shakespeare. So
sounds like you're saying, though, with the black boy, it sounds like you're saying they're getting the wrong messages in school and out of school. In both places, they're getting the wrong messages. They're getting the wrong messages from their community and their people around them who they trust, from the media, and from, you know, people in the classroom. So they're not really going anywhere where they're getting the right message.
Yeah, they're getting the wrong message from everywhere, which is why actually the school has such a hard time, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to counteract. I mean, you know, it's the same issue with black boys here. You know, I mean, it's no different. You know, we are trying to counter what they are being told everywhere else, and so it's hard because we're a drop in the ocean. I always feel like we're a drop in the ocean. What I always feel is like it's like they're in the quicksand. And they're being pulled down, and the people inside the quicksand, those are the rap artists and the drill artists and so on. They're pulling them down in the quicksand, and the absent father, he's pulling him down, and the brother and the cousin and whoever it is who's telling him that the world's against him and that he's a victim and so on, that's pulling him down. And the media telling him, yeah, you're going to get shot by the police and this is going to happen to you, pulling him into the quicksand. And then the school, we as the school, I'm trying to pull him out, and I'm trying, and sometimes I feel like, oh, I've got him, and then they get him, and they pull him, and I pull back, and I'm constantly pulling against that quicksand. And some of them you manage to pull out, and some of them you don't manage to save, you know? Wow. And that's where I say you gotta be forgiving of yourself, because you give everything to the job, and you give everything to these kids to try and pull them out of that quicksand. But you got to recognize the strength against which you are pulling, right? There's only one little school, and then everything else is against you. So, I mean, somebody once came to the school, a journalist, and said to me that we were like a fire burning underwater. And it is very much like that. And I think that educators who are trying to save these kids need to think of themselves a bit in that way, that they are fires burning underwater. And if sometimes you feel like you're going under, it's okay. You know, you are fighting a beast here, you know? And and what is so terrible for me is that, sadly, I think that very well-meaning people are some of the people who are pulling those kids down into the quicksand, and they think they're doing good, and they're not. And I don't, you know, I don't think they're bad people. I think, for instance, in the 1950s,
you know, good people, especially educated good people, do bad things all the time, right? And and a lot of them don't know what they don't know. You know, I have two questions that I didn't really get to, but as you were talking, they were like ringing out in my head. So I'll quickly just like offer. One of them is the first one. With so much of the behavioral discipline focus and all the prompts that go along with that, do you ever worry about creating compliant people? Like, you know, like people who are good at complying, but not people who are good at self-actuating. And then the second one is more about the state, but let's start with that one first. Do you worry about creating compliant people?
People always ask me this, and I always think, have you ever met kids? Like, I'm like, who are these compliant kids? I'd love to meet one. Frankly, I mean, make my life a lot easier if they were all compliant. I've never met these people. I mean, who are they? I just don't understand it. I mean, they're kids. They're always trying to get one over. Look, I tell you what it is. I tell you what the difference is between our school and perhaps another school that isn't as disciplined. Kids are always trying to rebel. Kids are always trying to find a way around. That's what they are. They're kids. That's what they do. And what will happen is a teacher will run into my office and they'll say, Katharine, we've got a situation. We've got a situation. And I'll say, what's the situation? They'll say, they're humming in the corridors. And the reason they're humming is because we're all watching them. We're all out in the corridors. We're all, and our corridors are meant to be silent. They're meant to just say morning and afternoon. And so they're not, so the way to rebel at our school is to hum, because if they hum and they all hum, we don't know who started the humming, and we can't even tell who.
Oh, I love this.
And so they do it to get at us. Now, look, that's what kids do, right? And so they do it, and then we go, oh my goodness. And then when this happens, I always laugh and think, you know what? If they're humming in the corridors and that's their rebellious act, I'll take that. I'll take that any day of the week, right? Because it means I still have order. Our kids are as far from compliant as any other kid, right? And in fact, if you came to our school, you would find kids who are really articulate, who are really interesting, who are really ambitious, who tell you what they want to do and how they're going to get there and so on. They are nothing like being compliant at all. Giving kids lots of knowledge enables them, in fact, to become revolutionaries. So Nelson Mandela went to a very traditional school. Stokely Carmichael, who coined the term Black Power, he went to a very traditional Bronx science school. The fact is that the more you know, the more revolutionary you can be, because you're more informed about the world and you're able to do something with it. So I just totally reject this idea that they're compliant. Kids are kids. And the more you can get them to learn, the better off they're going to be in their lives.
I love the statement, the more you know, the more revolutionary you can be. You can see my shirt, the revolution will be literate. It's kind of like my thinking. There is no revolution in the history of the world that has ever been predicated on illiteracy and innumeracy and inability to think and critically and know. We're wrapping up on time. I don't know if we could do this last question so quickly, but it is burning into my mind. I'm almost for sure I want to have you back when your next book comes out. And you've given me so much food for thought today that I just definitely would want to keep talking. As you were talking, you bumped up against my libertarian sensibilities when you said that the state is actually sometimes teaching the kid the wrong thing about their culture, or about, being ashamed of their state and their country and all of that stuff. And that struck me as like, does the state really have any responsibility or should the state be in the business of crafting what the public mind is, if the state is supposed to be governing by the consent of the governed, right? Free people. Like, should the state be in the business? I understand the state teaching you how to count and how to read and how to do the basics. But when you start getting into the state telling you what to think and making choices for you, my libertarian sensibilities start to feel like that's a little bit statist. I don't know what to call it, really. It's something to me.
Well, what I would say is that you're always teaching them something. It's impossible to just have a free-for-all. So we don't have a free-for-all. We are teaching them something. The question is, what are you teaching? And I think it would be far better to teach them to feel like they belong to their country than to teach them to feel like they are outsiders. And certainly in this country, we are teaching them to feel like they are outsiders. And to be honest, I think that happens as well in America, especially with Black kids. They're being told all the time that they are the outsider. And you're just going to you're giving them, you are not helping them. If you tell people that they're an outsider all the time, how on earth are they ever going to succeed in that country? If every time they go for an interview, they think there's a white man, he hates me. I mean,
well, he does hate you a lot of times, but I got it.
You ought to make them feel, now look, that doesn't mean that they're not going to understand the intricacies of the world and the history and life will teach them apart from that, obviously. But they need to begin from a grounding of, this is my country and this is where I'm going to make my life. And there are some good people in my country. I also just genuinely believe that there are good people, and that their teachers in particular. I mean, yes, there are some bad teachers out there, but I think most teachers are good people. Most teachers are giving their all and they want what's best for the kids. Sadly, I think a lot of them have been badly trained. I think that the system is broken in many ways, but I don't think the teachers are bad. I think the teachers are good. And I think we should all be working to help each other to become better at at what is the most challenging, most interesting, most wonderful job on the planet. Frankly, I don't understand why anybody would want to do anything else other than teach. It is amazing. Wow. And it's just the best thing in the world, because if you want to be able to, you want to be 95 and on your deathbed and look back and think, I did something. I contributed. I contributed to the world. And when you're a teacher, you can always do that on your deathbed. You know, if you're some marketing guy, I mean, I often think to myself, I'm bringing up these kids so they can become some marketing guy. I mean, I never want to be a marketing guy. I want to be a teacher. And I so hope, you know, my dream would be that some of our kids would come back and teach with us, you know, because it's just the best job in the world.
That is such a great and inspiring message. I thank you so much for coming today, coming on and talking with us and giving us so much to think about. We'd love to have you back even before any time. I would love to have you back because you've given me so much to think about. I'm going to keep writing about things that you said. What have I learned in the hour? What did I learn? I learned that it is possible to engineer a school with a concrete and a determined educational philosophy that helps kids of all status learn. It's possible to close the gaps that we think are unclosable. It only happens when all adults in their lives are rowing in the same direction. Definitely within the school, but I do think that there's some community responsibility outside of the school to row in the same directions too. And we should get clear on all of that. I also believe that you confirmed for me the things that I came in thinking, which was discipline plus knowledge. It's a good equation. It's a good recipe for kids learning. Yeah.
It is. Absolutely. Especially the most.
Especially the most challenged.
You know, the ones who are coming from those challenged communities, it's the best way of helping them and making them make something of their lives. Yeah.
Excellent. This has been so helpful for me. Everybody, I would encourage you to go to Twitter, look for @Miss_Snuffy, and follow Katharine and learn like I'm learning over time. Thank you so much, Katharine. We will be in touch again.
Thanks so much for having me. All right. Bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.